It's always complicated to adapt something from a different medium. Have you ever read a book and then seen a film adaptation of it and took note of all the differences? When I was but a young critter, I was very into Harry Potter, and for that I apologize, but I remember thinking how interesting it was to read the thoughts of the characters in the form of an inner monologue, something that doesn't happen in a movie. Books lend themselves more to go into detail about what the characters feel at the moment, since you can just put that into words, but when you put that into a movie, you gotta get a bit more creative. Video games have a very different strength for storytelling than movies. The gameplay itself can be used to convey a narrative, be it a commentary on the values of someone who takes lives without giving it a second thought, the isolated grief of a man who lost his wife, or sitting in a building full of killer robots with no way to fight back. Games don't need to tell you how it feels to be in a certain situation, because you've experienced it, so you know exactly how it feels. Hence why they have the potential to be so immersive. And some games take advantage of that and decide to tell their stories in less conventional ways. The original Five Nights at Freddy's is one of those titles. Since it neglects most ways of traditional storytelling, there are no cutscenes. The only dialogue in the game are pre-recorded messages by a dead guy who can't answer any questions. But this pizzeria is hiding way more than meets the eye. Unlike following entries, there isn't one narrative with major events being showcased here. If you put all the pieces of the narrative from this game together, you get a vague story about a tragedy that befell this place many years ago, with children being murdered, animatronics attacking people, and corporate negligence doing an atrocious job at dealing with it. To reinforce that, there's many supernatural events that show that this place is haunted. Sometimes posters will look a bit different, newspaper clippings will give you vague details about the story of this place, and the animatronic mascots show to be more alive than what you might suspect. But that mystery's gone now. It's been 10 years. Everybody and their mother knows that the robots are possessed by dead kids and that this guy did it, and this game has been dissected in its entirety. Also, we've had tons of other games expanding on the story, lore, character motivations. What Five Nights at Freddy's 1 means now to the story is completely unrecognizable from that original mystery. And then, they made a movie. How do you go about this? Really, how in the world do you translate all the backstory that the characters now have, justify the game mechanics in this other medium in a way that makes sense, and make it accessible to the general public? Because a movie should be accessible to anybody without them needing to binge all the MatPat videos. So I ask again, how the hell do you take the extensive story of Five Nights at Freddy's and bring it to a movie format? You don't. And you shouldn't. It is easy to forget what the franchise juggernaut it's become, but Five Nights at Freddy's at the time of its release was a highly experimental title. No game played like it. It was a strange combination of tower defense and survival horror mechanics. It wasn't the first game to have vague, ominous hints to a greater narrative, but usually those kind of games did give you more information, cutscenes, other characters to interact with. Whereas Five Nights at Freddy's gave you almost no context for what's happening. You're a security guard in this rundown pizzeria, the phone guy gives you advice and some bits of lore here and there, and that's all you know. If you want to uncover the story of this place, you need to keep your eyes open for the hints. The newspaper clippings in the wall, the changing posters, the rules, all of them hint towards a tragedy that befell this place not long ago. And even when putting all the pieces together, the only concrete events you know of is that 5 kids went missing here, and some person was bitten by an animatronic in 1987. And that's it in terms of the story for the first game. And that's all it needed to be. It was a standalone experience of being a security guard at a haunted pizzeria. Everything else was built around that concept. It had no burden of developing character relationships, writing too much dialogue, or even weaving together the events of the game in a coherent way. It didn't even need to provide a reason as to why the character keeps coming back to the deadly restaurant, because you're the reason. Every time you click on the next night is because you as a player controlling the main character are making him return to the location. But all of those advantages cease to exist when we want to tell a story in a traditional movie format. Suddenly, the main characters exist by themselves, with no input from the audience to influence their actions. So every decision they make has to be informed by something. Suddenly, they exist in a world ruled by internal consistency and not gameplay mechanics. And suddenly, there's a bigger need to make these people and places feel real. Video games often require a lot of suspension of disbelief to justify their mechanics, a lot of the time blurring the line between diegetic and non-diegetic elements. Some games try to be super immersive and realistic, but most elements in games exist in the way they do because you will have to interact with them. Why are the temples in The Legend of Zelda death traps conveniently filled with all the items and keys Link needs to traverse them, when in the lore they're meant to be places of worship? Because it's a video game level and you gotta play it. But if those temples were to exist in a movie, a book, or a manga, there's no gameplay to justify. They'll usually look closer to what you might expect from a place like this. And Five Nights at Freddy's is no different. The layout of this building makes no sense for a functioning pizzeria, or any use, really. Why is the security office tucked away like this with two massive hallways leading to it and so much wasted space like this? Why is there a massive vacant square that separates the two hallways? Why are there two of them? And how in God's green earth does it take electricity to keep those doors down? Look at any 3D rendition of the map of this game and you'll realize that no building looks like this. But when thinking in gaming terms, the two useless hallways are the pathways the enemies will take to kill you, and looking at how they move through them is meant to elicit a sense of urgency in the player. The security guard has to be far away from the rest of the area so the animatronics take some time getting there, and the doors use power to stay down as a way to limit your resources. Which means they couldn't keep any of that when making the transition to film. Now this has to be a real location that has functioning architecture and layouts, so the whole place looks entirely different. No odd hallways, no reverse gravity doors, and most importantly, no player character. Video game adaptations usually fall within three categories: the direct story translation, in which they retell the same story from the game just in a new medium; the canon inclusions, which take place in the same continuity as the game but telling their own story; and the third option, which is what the FNAF movie falls into, is taking elements from the games, like characters, events, and locations, and modifying them in a way that makes them understandable for moviegoers. The advantage of this last option is that it allows the creatives to tell their own story without being limited to existing events or risking disturbing the canon, while also getting to use all the major and popular characters from the story, while also keeping it accessible for new audiences. It also means that there is no direct comparison with scenes that adapt the same event, so the work can stand on its own merits. And I believe that this was the best possible option to make an adaptation of Five Nights at Freddy's. So now we have a clean slate. We can use these legacy characters in any way we want, as long as we keep their iconic elements intact. And we have to build a narrative around those recognizable elements from the first game, while also having the advantage of knowing the fuller narrative that the games have already explored, so we can take elements from later entries to plan accordingly for future movies. As for this first installment, the first order of business is answering one very simple question. Why would anyone go work at Freddy's? The easy answer: money. We all need it, even if the work is dangerous. As long as it puts food on the table, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. So do we make Mike the protagonist? A broke guy desperate for money to meet his basic needs? We could, but how would that setup naturally evolve? If this is the motivation for Mike, he has no personal connection to the place, other than a paycheck. His motivation for working here is valid, but if we want the noble protagonist, that just won't do. If Mike is our hero, he needs someone to save. Someone that depends on him. He needs a daughter. But a daughter may age the character too much for a mostly young audience, and having a father main character kinda gives him an inherent maturity, unless he was a teenage parent, and we're not opening that can of worms. So a little sister it is. This way we can see Mike's inexperience and Addie's lack of a mother figure as something sympathetic, without having to deal with the implications that a single teen dad would bring. So Mike had to start taking care of his sister Abby since their parents died and he became his legal tutor. Naturally, he wouldn't be able to go to college or get a high-paying job, so he's limited to entry-level, no experience required positions, which is right on line with working at Freddy's. But he can't be already working there when the movie starts, firstly because this is titled Five Nights at Freddy's, but also because we want the character unfamiliar with Freddy's so we can learn about it alongside him. So we need to put him in a position where he is desperate enough to get the worst job ever, and willing to come back. Hence why the custody battle with that evil aunt. Mike needs a job, so the courts will rule in his favor. But how do we keep Mike coming back? Firstly, we can't have the animatronics attack him immediately, because then he would just bail. We have to keep him oblivious until we can give him a solid reason to stay despite the danger. Sure, he's desperate for money, but not suicidal. So we need a reason as to why the animatronics don't attack. and we don't want to wait too long to see them kill people. After all, we do need tension. So we introduce a scene where people break into the restaurant to break stuff, animatronics kill them from wrecking their place. Also, it wouldn't hurt if the opening scene of the movie shows the robots killing a guy with this gnarly torture chair. So we can keep Mike out of danger for our writing needs, while also having the animatronics slime some people. So Mike is staying at the restaurant for the time being, but he's also not under attack. Let's have him experience some supernatural stuff here and there. Oh, he has a traumatic flashback. We need to give him a personal connection to the location, so that brother he dreams of. And his dreams get more vivid when he is in the restaurant. Now he has a personal reason to want to stay here. But you get it, so let's talk about the Freddy gang now. When making the transition from video game enemies to film characters, there's a couple things we can do now. For example, in the game the animatronics have a set path they will follow towards the office. Bunny will always take the left hallway, Chica the right, Freddy will wait for the power to run out. Once you become familiar with them, the scare factor is over, and they just become predictable obstacles. But in a movie, there's no enemy programming, just character actions. So once again, the animatronics are mysterious, and we don't know what they're thinking. Except that wasn't the intention. What they wanted to do here is emphasize the animatronics as victims, since they are murdered souls after all, hence why the robotic expressionless aspect is gone, and now they have expressive eyebrows, and they built a fort. Since everyone and their mother knows the truth about these machines, there's no point in lingering too much on the mystery, but we still need them to be threatening antagonists. So yes, they will kill people in the movie, just not innocent people. They kill the gang who busts into the place because they're wrecking their home, they kill Aunt Jane because I guess they know she's evil? And they only attack Mike once he's in their way. But riddle me this. How can we show a group of characters as sympathetic while also having them be the main antagonist force for most of the movie, and we also want to end the movie with the characters themselves sympathizing with the robots? The answer is simple. A bigger bad guy. If the children were killed, there has to be a killer, so who better to be the big bad of this story than the man responsible for the deaths in the first place? However, we can't have him in the movie from the start, because that would undermine the Freddy gang. They need their time to shine, but we also want the main villain of the franchise to have presence. So why not introduce him under a false identity? He can be the one to give the job to Mike. But why would he want Mike to work at Freddy's? Well, we could just have Mike be some guy to William, but if we want that sweet personal investment, now there's an idea. Mike's missing brother was one of William Afton's victims. And how does Mike meet William? At the employment office. William is there because he probably needs a constant supply of security guards for his haunted house. And Mike is there because, like we said before, he can't keep a job. And this being a small town, after spending enough time at employment offices, Mike was bound to eventually run into William. William gives Mike his new job and instructions, but it wouldn't make sense for him to give Mike too much information. At the end of the day, Mike is only here so Willie can keep an eye on him, or worst case scenario, dispose of him. But William can't be there to keep an eye on Mike because he's only supposed to be some guy from the employment office, which is why we needed Vanessa. Someone who knows about the place and can put Mike up to speed. But how does she know all of this? How does she know the truth about Freddy's and let William be free? To solve that, we could make her a fan or an underling like the Vanessa from the games, but we have too many antagonists already, and it wouldn't hurt to give Mike an adult character to interact with. No, she will be William Afton's daughter. She works as a police officer in the area surrounding Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and she has a past connection as a kid to this location, so she stays sympathetic while having helped the purple guy. We will make Vanessa William Afton's daughter. Why does she help him? Because she knows what this man can do and is terrified of him. And having grown up with him as a father, one can only imagine the kind of childhood she had. So she will be subservient to her dad. But she is an ally. She tells Mike about the missing kids, she tells him to never bring Gabby back, but she can't bring herself to tell him the full truth. She's just too scared. So that way we can still build up the mystery of this place without just having a character tell everything to the audience. I think that's enough. When I started working on this, I planned on making a video about how this movie is just okay, since I see a lot of people being very hyperbolic about it. Either it's trash and it's a failure, or it's a gift for the fans and you don't get it. I wanted to provide an unbiased critique about how, yes, this film ain't no masterpiece, but it's a fine, fun Halloween flick. But I kept going back to this scene right here, when Vanessa takes Mike to the supply closet and they see the Springlock suit. When watching the movie, I was very confused by this. It doesn't make sense for the suit to be here. There's a dedicated room for parts and service, and this suit is not haunted, so it's not like it could have moved here. Or the Torture Freddy mask. Why have this in the movie when the animatronics clearly don't need it to kill people? Why not just keep the game equivalent of them forcefully shoving you into a Freddy suit and killing you in the process? And I still believe those are valid points to make. If someone calls them flaws in the movie, I would agree, but writing about how this scene works and this one doesn't, so the movie is a number score out of 10, I just found it really boring. There's better channels out there that can notice things like that far better than me, and will provide that information in energetic and entertaining manners. I guess in a way, I was trying to be like them. But I wanted more. Yes, these scenes make no sense, but let's not just assume the writers are dumb. Let's think. Even if the quality of the movie is the same, I still want to know. Why is it like this? And then I thought, well, they needed to introduce the Chekhov's gun of the Springlock suits, since that's how William dies. But Mike can't go into parts and service because that place is full of dead bodies. And the mask exists to give Mike a life or death situation he can escape without making the animatronics seem incompetent. But when I say that I understand why they would write these scenes this way, it doesn't mean that they are not flaws. They are. And the difference between a good writer and a great writer is polishing off those rough edges in your story before the final draft. Because sure, thanks to the torture mask, we don't need to write a scene where Mike successfully fights off the animatronics, but now we have the problem that it makes little sense that if they wanted to kill him, they wouldn't just do it. And if they wanted to use the mask, it makes no sense that they didn't stay to make sure Mike dies. Like I said, understanding a problem doesn't make it go away. But I wanted to use this opportunity to give a bit of a peek behind the curtains as to how a lot of creating a story is born out of necessity, creating characters to fill a certain role and then expanding upon them, and following the natural evolution of the concept we introduce. I believe everybody should be critical of what they consume, which a lot of people seem to take as me saying that you shouldn't enjoy flawed things, and that's not the case. I enjoy this movie, and I hope that if I ever talk about the second one, I will have more positive things to say about it. But if you leave having learned one thing, I want it to be this. It is important to recognize flaws in the things we love. And if we want the things we make to be better in the future, it's not enough to recognize when something doesn't work. We need to understand why it exists in that state. Good night. Hey, it's me. You didn't hear me last time. That video, holy fucking shit, 30,000 views. I know that's not a lot in big YouTube terms, yada yada, but it more than tripled the subscriber count, and hopefully there's more people watching this. Yeah, also the channel is almost monetized, so that's cool. I wanted to do a bit of a, like I said, I started wanting to do like a movie review kind of thing, but I didn't like the direction, so I ended up changing it. So basically the story of every video I make. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't know if I'm gonna make more movie stuff. I did this because the FNAF second one movie and, you know, adaptation, video game. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it, because if you didn't, I would be really surprised that you're here.